Welcome everyone to another episode of Straight Talk TV with your host, Tony Brown.
And as Steve said, welcome to another edition of Straight Talk TV. And we like to say, Straight Talk is the show that cares about you, where the information comes from you, the people, to the people, and have some people giving you some powerful information to educate us, to inform us. Right now, in your hearts and in your minds, please stand for the Black National Anthem.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let us march on till victory
Yes.
is won. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun, about a day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Let us march on till victory is won. Is won. Is won.
Oh my goodness, go ahead. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Steve. That is exactly what these two people are doing. They're marching on. And since we have a lady on the panel, or a guest, I'm gonna start with the lady first, and then I'm gonna go with the gentleman. We have Miss Vera Warren. Vera Warren is a graduate from Willamette University and Lewis and Clark School of Law. She is currently serving, now get this, not the first, but her second term as a clerk at the Oregon Court of Appeals. But before she started clerking, Vera practiced criminal defense and civil litigations in Multnomah County. Joining us also is a gentleman who is a powerful gentleman. And I'm gonna get into why I say he's extra powerful and how he has paved the way for many and someone else special as well. He's the Esquire Ernest Warren. Ernest earned his bachelor's in economics and a master's in business administration for the business, government, and non-for-profit management for Willamette. His JD is from Arizona State University, College of Law. Today, Ernest is the managing attorney at Warren and Sugarman Law Firm. His work has aligned him with passion for affordable housing, the policies, and the justice. He is entrusted with mentors as a mentor, and many value and respect him, including the gang-impacted youth. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vera Warren and Esquire Ernest Warren. Thank you both for joining us at Straight Talk. And we truly understand that your schedules are busy, and it is a blessing to have you in our midst. And as we say at Straight Talk, we're going to provide the information from you, the people, to the people. I would like her to share a little bit about her journey, how she got this passion, because it's certainly a passion to do what each one of you are doing, and we're grateful. Please welcome Ms. Vera.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
It's a pleasure.
I guess my journey started similar to my dad's. I'm also part of the Warren family, but my journey towards the legal field started differently. Both my parents always hammered in education. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I loved science, but it wasn't until I got a little bit older that I realized that education is important, but it's not always traditional education that's important. So I started getting more educated about social justice issues, grassroots organizations, and that's when I realized that I could make more change, or direct change, in my opinion, or I could see a way to make change through law. And so I switched from science to social sciences and majored in psychology, and then eventually went to law school.
Well, we're certainly grateful and blessed that you're here, Mr. Ernest Warren. And we're just going to share a little bit about your journey, because I would like for our viewers to understand a little bit about you, how you became the person that you are today, serving the community, and your passion. Mr. Ernest Warren, please welcome. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Tony. You know, I really love your program, watched it for many years, and it was an honor when you called me and said that you'd like me to appear. So I want to give a shout out to you because you're excellent. My journey began right here in Portland, Oregon. Many of you might know there's a large African-American family in Portland that came from a place called Linden, Texas, that's right on the border of Louisiana, not far from Cane River, and I'm part of the Warren family. In 1960, although my dad sold insurance and my mother worked for the post office, my youngest memories were always going out before we had migrant farm workers to work in the fields with my grandfather. At my youngest age of 8 years old, he tied a bucket around my waist with a rope and said, "Get to work, son." And I got to work, and as I was working, I kind of daydreamed for a minute, and he softly hit me in the head with a dirt clod and said, "Get back to work, son." And I said to myself, if I ever get out of this field, which I didn't get out of for the next 6 years, I'm never coming back.
Yes.
And around that same time, my dad asked me, he said, "Son, there are only 3 professions in life: doctor, lawyer, and preacher. Which one do you want to be?" And I was like, "I have no idea. Could you please ask me this question again after I think about it?"
Right.
And so Perry Mason came on. I saw that suicide door Lincoln Continental convertible. He's wearing suits in court and defending people. And I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a lawyer for my community.
Yeah.
And I set my goal to become an attorney at that time. And now God has blessed me. I've been an attorney for 33 years.
Wow. Let's sing the clap praise for that. Sing the clap praise for that. And today, we're going to, whichever time zone you're watching the show, we're going to be touching on 3 different subjects. It's going to be criminal defense. We're going to talk about real estate. We're going to talk about injuries. And it's going to all tie in to what is happening today and in the past. And it was called the voting right. But we're going to tie that in. And I just want to start with the criminal defense part of this. And we're going to segue into the voting right piece of it. But Mr. Warren, can you share a little bit about the criminal defense and how this ties into our voting rights and the atmosphere then, now?
Thank you for asking that important question. As you know, in our community, let's just take locally, over 10% of the African-American men are in prison or in jail right now, over 18 years of age. To me, that they have certain constitutional rights that are known as the 4th, 5th, 6th Amendment, primarily. The 4th Amendment, you can't be subjected to unlawful search and seizure. The 5th Amendment, you have rights to due process. And the 6th Amendment, you have a right to an attorney, you have a right to a jury, unanimous jury. In Oregon, for example, until just last year, they allowed 10-2 jury verdicts. So it didn't even have to be unanimous, and we were the only state other than Louisiana for over 50 years that did that to people of color. So for me to try to free people of color, to try to, I mean, certainly there are heinous crimes and people must pay for heinous crimes, but the way that the system has been set up has always been imbalanced. It's always unfair. Those scales of justice have not been fair. So I've spent my whole career just trying to get justice, not only for people of color or poor people in our community, but for all people. That's what I've dedicated my life to do.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. And Ms. Vera, if you could go ahead and chime in on that piece as we talk about the criminal defense. And you're in the appellate courts, so you're seeing a different aspect of this. Can you please share a little bit of what you see in the field that you're in about this criminal defense, the criminal justice system? Sure.
Well, in my case, when a decision's made at the trial level and one doesn't agree with the decision, they send it to my court to relook at that decision. And oftentimes, there are things that I see in the record because I reviewed the entire record, all of the trial court documents, the transcripts, everything is, something's not fair. Absolutely. But the way that our system is set up, especially at my level, unfortunately, is it has to fit within a certain way that we review the appeals, and it has to fit. And the law says something, but justice isn't necessarily the same thing. So I do see a lot of appeals come in for people of color, a lot of DHS, a lot of criminal cases. And unfortunately, we have good parents who just don't have resources, and we can't do much because of the way that our review is set up. So it's definitely a difficult position to be in, but it also tells us why we need better judges who are more equipped to see the whole picture and not just a narrow way of seeing things.
See, and you touched on two topics right there that I want to tie this voting right into. One of them is having the right judges. And then the next one is the criminal justice system, the jury piece, and how important it is to vote. Either one of you chime in on those two subjects and how that do tie into that voting right that was passed in 1963, 65?
65. Go
65,
ahead.
yes. Because today, people say, oh, my vote don't count. Oh, they don't care about my vote. But Ms. Vera just touched on two topics, judges, and once it reaches her in the court appeal process. But you talked about the system itself before they get to that point. So please touch on that.
So I touched briefly on the way that we get judges into office, at least at the state level. The judges are appointed by the governor, but then they also go up for election. And oftentimes, so that's one thing is voting. It's important to pick the right governor because they're the ones who then in turn pick the judges. And although we sometimes are able to elect judges, it's not typical that judges are up for election. And when they are, they're often ran unopposed. So, and the same thing mirrors at the federal level. It's important what president you elect because they appoint all the judges at the federal level. And I can tell you that, unfortunately, Obama left a lot of seats open when he left office, and Trump filled a lot of those seats open. And so right now, there's initiatives to kind of get more progressive judges, more judges of color, more female judges, more judges who have backgrounds in criminal defense instead of judges who just worked for big corporate law firms. So there's initiatives to get more diverse judges after Trump took advantage of the open seats. But also for judges to get confirmed, they have to go through they have to get approved by the Senate. And so that also goes back to voting, because you want to pick the right senators and people who represent you, because all of these people are representing your voice. And so all of these people play a role in who judges are. And then the judges make decisions on everyday things, anything from criminal defense, like I said, DHS cases, divorces, custody. And like I said, if you have a judge who, as we have typically seen, is a white male who doesn't have a diverse perspective and all they can see is a narrow way of thinking, you're not going to get really creative in making changes. So that's why it's important, because it all comes full circle at some point.
Well, second, Mr.
And I need to chime in right
Great talk. You want to chime in?
Yes. We have the Fourth Amendment of the United States that said no one should be subject to arrest or search or seizure without a warrant that's been reviewed by a neutral and impartial judge. And so what Vera said, and all the judges are not elected in federal court. They're all appointed. In state court, the governor has appointed many good judges, but then they run for an election, and like Vera said, they're unopposed. So now we have a person. And most people now that are in the criminal justice system, if not all of them, are indigent. They can't afford to pay Vera $350 an hour for her to seldom do you have anyone that can afford to pay an attorney and get a zealous defense. Right. So now you're stopped on the streets of Portland on MLK by the police, and they can have good motives, but they know the law better than the average citizen, and they don't have a warrant. And they ask, okay, well, they might not even have a reason to stop you, except for you look suspicious, and that period of suspicion has expired. So, well, can I search you? They'll ask you for consent. Right then, they don't have a warrant under the Fourth Amendment. You have the right to say, no, you can't search me, but many of them trying to please say, okay, and then they're found in possession of some criminal, drug or whatever. Right. And now they're caught up in the system, and that system can destroy their life forever. And so in those circumstances, or the law enforcement comes into your home or your hotel room without a warrant. They definitely need a warrant there. And then the judges over time have not upheld the Fourth Amendment. They've said, you can have an exception, a good faith exception to come in to someone's home or hotel room, to the place where you are supposed to be totally protected and have privacy. So those are the kinds of issues that I fight. And then in trial, I go with the jury, because a jury is a person of peers that we can speak in simple terms with, the reason about who our client is, right, and what the circumstances of the case are. And so I think it's very important, and and then they vote. The jurors vote. Under the Sixth Amendment, they vote unanimous. But so many times, I must have had 70 jury trials, and most of the time I prevailed in state court here in Oregon, where the verdict was 10-2 in my favor, or 11-1, or 12-0, because they didn't have unanimous verdicts like the rest of the country, and as like was required by this the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution.
Now, in your 33 years, I think it's about 33 years that you've been practicing?
Yes, sir.
33 years. How important is it for people to understand you have the right to remain silent?
Very important. The more important right, though. So the way that the law has developed, they can continue questioning, even though you say, I'm going to remain silent. They can continue. The only way that they can stop is when you say, I want my right to an attorney. Then they have to stop. They have to go get your attorney. If you say something after that, they likely won't be able to lose it unless they did a whole waiver of their right to an attorney. But see, law enforcement, police officers, special agents of the FBI, special agents of the Drug Enforcement Agency, detectives they're taught on how to get a person, a suspect, to waive their rights. That's what they're taught. I mean, and that's the chess match that goes on. They're trying to get, and many times the young person, the young suspect is somewhere between 17 years old and 30, and they know nothing about their rights. They have no education. And it's a system, and we can't blame law enforcement for that. That's their job, is to get a conviction.
Right.
It's our job to tell people about their rights. And if they know about their rights, they're empowered by their rights, including the right to vote.
Right to vote. See, it ties back to that right to vote, that right to vote. And I appreciate that we touch on when you are stopped. Now, I know people probably saying, well, that's easy for them to say, that's easy to say, but that's your right not to say anything, because you can't convince the officer. They're just doing their job.
Exactly. Let's talk about that. So let's just say, okay, a police officer is trained to stop you. He could see a moving violation in your car, or he can do what's known as a pretext stop, because he has suspicion about some real serious felony activity. So he can say you swerved within your lane, and he has the right to pull you over, and you have to stop, because if you don't, you committed a felony called attempting to elude a police officer trying to stop you. So you do have to stop. So usually he'll come up and say, you know why I stopped you?
Mm-hmm.
And you'll probably say no. And then he'll say, well, I stopped you because you swerved within your lane. Then you say, okay. And then he says, may I see your driver's license and proof of insurance? You're supposed to have that on your person at all times and in your car at all times. Mm-hmm. Or that can lead to another crime, failing to display your driver's license. The violation of no proof of insurance. So now, the heat is on, as the Isley brothers used to say. The heat is on, Yes. Mm-hmm. And so now they're saying, would you consent to talk to me? If it was only about the traffic stop, then they write a citation and let you go or give you a warning. If it's something else, they say, hey, would you consent to me searching your car? And at that point, 95% of people don't know. You can say no. But you say yes, and they search and they find a gun, they find drugs, mm-hmm. and now you're in the criminal justice system. So that's kind of how it goes. And so we pay our law enforcement people to have that level of professionalism. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it goes bad and there's brutality, but most of the time it's really simple that they're doing their job, and the person, the suspect, does not know their right to say, I want my attorney. That's the most important thing to say. Not that, if you say, I want to remain silent, they're going to keep talking. Gotcha. And if you don't remain silent, they're going to keep talking. Okay. But if you say, I want an attorney, they're going to say, let's stop. And if it's that important of a thing, they're going to go get you an attorney.
And if I could just add, it's important. It's important to also know how to assert your rights. And that's where it comes in on my level of review of when I'm working on appellate cases is, if we're reading a case and the police, someone said, do you think I can speak to an attorney? That's not the same as saying, I want my attorney. So when we review cases and, the defendant is claiming I asserted certain rights, but then we review the record and all he said was, do you think I'll eventually get an attorney? Not that he was asserting his right to an attorney. There's nothing we can do for him. So it's also important of how you assert your rights. If you say that you want to remain silent, you need to remain silent, because the police are going to try to bait you. I've seen this in records too, where the police will, like my dad said, continue to talk, and then someone will say, well, wait, am I going to jail today? Or they get kind of scared instead of just remaining silent, because the police are trying to get them scared. They're trying to say, where are you driving me? Are you taking me to the police station? Are you taking me this, and that? And the police are trying to get them to then kind of get squirmy. And then that's when people start talking, and then they just waive their right to silence.
And I appreciate that. So I just want to kind of put it into just a few statements for people when they encounter, whether it's myself or anybody. The first thing is probably, and I'm guessing, is the way you exert your right, how you speak to an officer.
Mm-hmm.
Be as professional and as calm as you can. I think that would be a big part of it. And so that creates an energy between both of them where it's a little more peaceful, and hopefully both parties will not be aggressive in that. Then the next thing, just both of you correct, this is not my lane, I'm just putting it in layman terms. The next thing is, can I speak to my attorney? And the third thing is remain silent.
Yes, and stick with that.
Okay, I'm getting a yes on that. So I want our viewers and audience to know, given the atmosphere, especially these three elements is very important. And don't get in a position where we get agitated and this is taking too long and I'm just tired of this. And then we find ourselves start asking them questions.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's on again. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, and unfortunately, it's uncomfortable. It's natural to want to know where the police are taking you. It's natural to, at some point, kind of consider, am I in trouble for something, when you don't know exactly what the outcome is. But that's unfortunately where they have an advantage. So it's to know your right, to assert your right, and stick with your rights.
Now, my viewing audience is probably wondering, how did Miss Vera become involved with law? And what was one of the pivotal moments in your life where you was exposed in your atmosphere to a trial attorney, to the process? Can you reflect back on one of those moments?
Sure. Well, one of the times where I considered that I should go into law was when I was actually interning at OHSU, and I was collecting research at the toxicology department for migrant workers. And all of the research that I was collecting was how pesticides affected their brains and their function. And the reason why we were collecting that is because we wanted to make change in the policies on, their safety and OSHA rules and things like that. And I realized that all the people that are fighting for the migrant workers and the policymakers went to law school or are lawyers. And so that's when I kind of started to think about becoming a lawyer. And then of course I have the best mentor in the world, which I'm very lucky to have. And I touched on this before when we were talking before the show, but in Portland especially, there's not a lot of Black attorneys. There's not a lot of Black people in Portland. And so I found in law school, in a predominantly white law school, with, Black people coming from out of state, that they're kind of lost. They're like, where are our people?
Right.
Everyone's a little bit confused. And so, having a dad who opened the first Black law firm and who's never said no to being a mentor or taking someone to lunch, that's super critical. And that's super critical for people to see and absorb and connect with.
Absolutely, we can appreciate that, because we need to understand how important to have a mentor, or just that encouragement, that little boost, and creating an atmosphere. And creating an atmosphere, I asked you about a pivotal moment. Now, Mr. Warren has been an attorney for 33 years. Can you share a little bit about when you were at home and you were practicing being an attorney, and what that influence was all about, and who helped you?
Well, Vera helped me, and her siblings helped me as well. What I would do when I would practice an opening statement or jury selection, I would put them. We had a dining room that sat above our family room that was a few steps below, and I'd put them up there like they were jurors, and I would pass by my opening statement on them. I would say something to Vera and her siblings like, the most important thing you can remember today, the facts will show, is that my client is not guilty of murder, you know, and I would go through my full opening statement and explain my facts. And then I would say, how did I do? And then, she would give me some reasonable feedback on how that all happened. And I would listen, I would listen. And then so when I got in front of the real jury, I was practiced. I was prepared to present my opening statement. And so I've refined those skills over the years. And so the other beautiful thing is she's had 3 jury trials with me where she had to sit down right next to me. We're picking a jury, we're trying cases. We got one hung jury in a civil personal injury case that we settled after that, but I was so upset by that. But she was so instrumental in that case, which resulted in a victory ultimately. But it's so much fun to sit by her and we're asking questions and she's telling me what to ask and she's telling me what this juror is doing or this juror has fell asleep or the judge is raising his brow at me. You really want to know what's going on. It's a dynamic thing in the courtroom. And, if you lose, many of my cases haven't made it to appeal. I can tell you that because we have to leave it in the courtroom at that time. Otherwise, it's lost.
Now I could feel the passion, but I was also noticing the smile on Miss Vera's face. You remember that moment being, one of his jurors at the young age?
I do remember.
Yeah, share a little bit about, because I can see the energy and the smile on your face when he was sharing about that.
I do remember. I mean, the way that our living room was set up, he was able to kind of make it like a jury gallery. So he was able to set it up like we were the jury. And I remember him practicing his cases. And, my dad's always done some heavy cases. So there were like murder trials and things like that going on when I was in elementary school. But it's funny how everything comes full circle. And so for my first trial that I did all by myself, my dad reviewed my opening statement and helped me with it. So.
Oh, wow.
And she won.
Yeah. Oh, congratulations. Absolutely. So it's like one of those atmospheres like, oh, Dad, here you go again.
It sometimes can be that way.
Well, her siblings did like, Dad, I'm tired. I want to go. This is enough.
Right. Now, your dad tapped on the part about you sitting next to him and picking jury. What was that like, that moment? So you two sharing that courtroom atmosphere and picking the jury together?
It is definitely something to process, knowing kind of what power you have and in situations. So picking a jury is super important. You can have someone who just totally displays their bias, and that's what you're looking for, but you're also trying to get a vibe with their unspoken words too. And so in the moment, it's, you got to be quick thinking and you have to know what your purpose is. And your purpose is to make sure that your client side of this story prevails. And so you're choosing a jury like that. And so in the moment, you have this power essentially that you need to make sure that you're taking seriously and you're staying on top of it, reviewing all the juries. It goes kind of fast sometimes. It depends on the judge too. And that's a whole nother ballpark. It depends on what kind of judge does voir dire, which is what jury selection is. But yeah, I think it's definitely special to have some of those first moments with your father, but it's also, I feel so lucky because I was able to learn in a comfortable way with someone that I could trust to teach me how to do it the best.
Right. And now you touched on something, jury selection. Jury selection comes from a pool of voters. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
It comes from both. Well, it depends on if you're in federal court
Okay.
or if you're in state court. In
Okay.
federal court and in state court, it comes from a mixture of voters and people who have been determined to be citizens with driver's licenses.
Okay.
So yeah, but you have to be a voter.
Right. And that segue us back to the voting rights. Get out and vote, because that makes you eligible to be on the jury. And from my understanding, part of the language is to be judged by peers of your own. And a lot of times and you probably, this is both of your lanes, so you can touch on this. A lot of times we find ourselves going into courtroom where we see more of the other nationalities than ourselves judging us.
Particularly in federal court. When
Okay.
you appear in a state court, it's county by county. And so I've been in Pacific County, Washington, Clark County, Washington, Snohomish County, Washington. And then you're not going to find a lot of diversity in the jury.
Okay.
In federal court, it goes by, they kind of have, it goes by state, but it goes by counties.
County. Okay.
So you go all the way to the Oregon coast, and then you go as far as past Mount Hood to Hood County and so forth. And now you have this diversity of folks and a diversity of thinking. And it took me a while, but I had to learn to engage all of that type of thinking. And Vera spoke to that. And so when I'm in a conservative place, U.S. District Court in Eugene, and they're choosing from Deschutes County all the way to Coos County. Those people are very conservative. Those people are conservative in values, but they can be extremely fair. And so the power that I've learned over time is to be as vulnerable as I possibly can with the questions that I'm asking them about how they feel, about can they find under the circumstances that my client is not guilty. When you have the federal government and the FBI bringing all these charges with all their power against my client, are you open to the possibility? Are you willing, in the face of all of it, when they've read the charges against my client and they're this long, are you willing to consider that under the Constitution, my client is not guilty? How do you feel about that? Can I hear you say not guilty? And they're willing to do that. They get, what does reasonable doubt mean? Okay, here my client is charged, and the judge just read the rule to you. You're supposed to presume my client innocent. How can you do that? And they struggle with those difficult questions that I ask, but I'm vulnerable with them to receive it. And I want the hard questions, answers. Your client looks guilty. Thank you. Could you tell me more? Now, see, most attorneys are going to run from that, and marginalize that person. And the whole jury sees that, and they're going to say, no. I say, well, tell me more. I go in deeper, because that's the person I want to engage to figure out what it is. Does he have a racial bias? Is he a police supporter? We just want a fair trial.
And we can feel that. And I also want to put out there to everybody, if you get a subpoena, how important it is to answer that subpoena. Either one of you can touch on that.
I would say answer the subpoena, because it's ordered. But it depends on what the subpoena is for. If the subpoena is for discovery or documents of some sort, then you could probably work out with the attorney how to get those and to what limits and things like that. But if the subpoena is to appear at trial and that's all they're asking, unfortunately, you're likely going to have to appear. They may be able to work around your schedule, but always respond to subpoena in conclusion.
Because the penalty for not responding is contempt of court.
Uh-oh, we
In
got
state-
another element.
Yeah, in state court, they can put you in jail for 6 months until you answer that subpoena. And so you don't want the crime, you don't want the punishment, you don't want the hurt of contempt of court. They can fine you and put you in jail. And in federal court, it could be a felony. And you can't remove felonies from your federal records. So I urge you, please take a subpoena seriously.
And speaking of subpoena, I would like to invite both of you back at a time because I want to touch about the subpoenas, because today in the atmosphere, we're seeing a lot of situations going on and everybody said, like, if they subpoena, why aren't they answering? But that's a whole different show. Well, because I really want to, I said educated to one person. They said, you can't educate me. So we're going to inform them of why it's important and what we're seeing on the news and different channels and papers and wherever empirical way they get the information, why certain people get subpoenas and they find a way not to answer. But I want to move on to the real estate piece and how important that is about real estate. Mr. Warren, Vera, either one of you can touch on that.
Well,
Your expertise.
Thank you.
She yield to you.
Well, for 30 years, I've had the pleasure of practicing real estate law and to defend and reinvest people who have lost their homes. There was we call him a slumlord, a company in Oregon called Dominion Capital that had literally ripped people off of their homes in North and Northeast Portland at a time when the financial institutions had red-lined it, which means you couldn't get a conventional loan in North or Northeast Portland. This scam that Dominion Capital would come and take people's property. And the city of Portland came to me and they formed a nonprofit corporation and they told me go after those people and get those people their homes back. And it was the most gratifying thing I've ever did in my life. And now that we got everybody's home back in North and Northeast Portland, Tony, I know there are people that you know that were affected by this scam. 300 of the properties became affordable housing for a nonprofit corporation, and that nonprofit has grown from being 10 million in the whole to now being worth over $500 million.
Wow.
And all they do is affordable housing. So they're they're renting to people that are our most vulnerable people in Portland, in North and Northeast Portland. We have 1,000 rental units. They have 1,000 rental units.
Right.
I say we.
Absolutely.
And we've also built affordable housing. So a place that would cost $500,000 to purchase that we've just built in the last 2 years, they got to purchase with the city's help for under fair market value, $290,000. Just beautiful property. So that is a real excellent thing. Real estate is a wonderful thing. Should be everybody's passion. And now home ownership for people of color, building wealth in our community. That's kind of like the new frontier for me now. Trying to help people with home ownership.
Now, there was a few people that work with you. We want to give a shout out to them, a few ladies that work with you. because we always want to give everybody their roses while they can smell them.
Yeah, well, the former executive director of Portland Community Reinvestments Initiative was Maxine Fitzpatrick, and I had the pleasure to work 3 decades with her. And now the new executive director is Kimberly Horner, and she's doing an excellent job. And we're just trying to make homes. We're trying to do more home ownership, and we're trying to maintain the portfolio that we have to keep people with families of people of color and poor people with median family income, decent housing. There's too many people sleeping on the streets right now. Wow. And if we wanted to know about really, I mean, if they were really open to know about doing affordable housing, they would come to PCRI and say, how can we replicate this as a model, you know? But that's another story.
But we certainly want to give a warm shout out to Miss Maxine and Miss Kimberly. Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm coming back to the voting right, because from my understanding, part of that voting right, there was a piece or a section in there that addresses owning land. So either one of you can touch on that a little bit.
Well, at some point, I'd like to give you the timeline of voting rights in the United States and just lay it all out for you and let you have it all. But I think what you're saying is after Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, they passed the Civil Rights Law of 1968, which started the Fair Housing Administration. And so now you see in housing and urban development, and now you see on every contract to purchase real estate, every lease, that you can't discriminate based on race, color, gender, national origin, religion. There's 7 characteristics that you cannot discriminate on. And then of course in Oregon, we expand that. That list that you can't discriminate against people. And so that was so important, because before that time, you could,
right. Mm-hmm.
You could discriminate against people, and the banks redlined. They wouldn't loan to you if you lived in a certain community.
Well, go ahead.
So now that has changed, and that would be a whole nother story, but that was, that led to the vote in Congress. The people we had put in Congress, the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson, walked along party lines with Strom Thurmond and all of these elected officials in 1968 to make sure that law passed, and it influenced education. It influenced public accommodations, hotels, restaurants. It influenced employment, Title VII. So it was really humongous. And, after time, certain things didn't get enforced, but over time, things balance out and things become right.
Well, we certainly look forward to the opportunity you coming back and share that timeline with us when we have more time, just because I think if we continue to share the information and give people a visual, they can see how important that particular law, because I read about it being enacted for 7 years and again at 10 years. So there was a reacting process of that particular law. But I want to go to the voting part, and I want to hear from Ms. Vera what you see about the voting process that's going on today and how we're looking at it.
Well, I think that voting is extremely important, and that everyone who, has the power to vote does, but there are so many obstacles still for people to vote. I think that Oregon, for example, is one of few states who allows mail-in voting. And I think that now, this is recent, but now our postage is covered. So, you don't have to get the additional burden of finding and paying for a stamp, but there are a lot of places still where people have to go in to vote. And based off where you live, that could be a whole nother obstacle. They'll do anything to win and do loopholes. So they'll, put one drop box in a city where there's hundreds and thousands of people, and they won't make it quite clear where the drop box is. It could be on a building somewhere in a random mailbox looking thing. Sometimes they make it so there's only one place that you can go, so the lines are wrapped around the corner. You see celebrities now bringing meals on wheels and foods and drinks and DJs just to make it more pleasant for people to wait in line. People have to take off work, and so we've definitely made progress, absolutely. And I think in Oregon, we're pretty fortunate in some ways where voting isn't such a burden for us, but in so many other states, you know, there's a lot of obstacles still, and there's still, you know, people facing racism where there's actually people bullying people not to vote. There's people in my generation who goes to the poll and volunteers to you know, review the counts and things like that. So there are ways to keep voting accountable and things like that, but we still have a long way to go before it's actually fair and reflective of what we want.
And see, the voting right, and I appreciate that, because there is, and we have to get away from this, there is a generation of young at hearts. They call them elders. I call them young at hearts. And I borrowed that term from President Obama because he always said young at hearts. And I thought that was just so awesome that he said that. So I use that, young at hearts. And we have progressive or millenniums or millennium X. And they kind of look at things a different perspective. And can you kind of share a little bit about how they look at that?
Sure.
Okay,
I mean,
it's straight talk. So
yeah, I mean, I don't know much of, I think that there are differences in my opinion. I think that, but a lot of the differences come of how racism and those obstacles hide itself. So, you know, you have to look at the history of why young at hearts are the way they are, like the way that they were bullied to not vote or things like that. Look different. Racism and these obstacles to voting are always evolving, and they're evolving with the time to kind of hide. And Portland's a great example. We tell a lot of people that we're a really liberal state, but you know, we lack diversity, and there's a lot of ways that we're not liberal. So I think the way that younger millennials are reacting to voting is just the way that the obstacles are disguising itself. We're now just fighting in different ways and changing with the times. And so I think that there's differences in how we fight for things.
it's interesting you said it, because a couple of the examples that I draw on that was shared with me is back in the day, if you will, they were told to count how many bubbles is in the soap or how many jelly beans is in a bar of jelly. And I was interviewing a Tuskegee Airman, Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson, bless his heart. He said they had to stand in a doorway and stand there as long as they could. These are just before voting. These were just different processes, obstacles that was placed in the way. Now, can we bring that up to today? Some of the obstacles that are placed in front of people not to vote.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go for it, Dad. I think I said a few.
Yes.
Yeah, well, most definitely. I just want to quote the case correctly.
Okay.
But in 2013, there is the United States Supreme Court case of Shelby versus Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States. Eric Holder took Shelby County to task because they had a history of discriminating against people of color. And so, but the Supreme Court, the conservative Supreme Court said, well, it was constitutional, and that part of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 cannot be enforced by the Attorney General. So what that means now is so what you see is when we see a big presidential election in November, and you see the camera in Atlanta, Georgia, or Houston, Texas, and you see these long lines, and that's crazy for us to see in Portland, Oregon, because we vote by mail. and they know it's our signature, and they can verify us because the DMV records show that this is our address, this is who we are, and it's a great process. And so in Houston, Texas, people might not even get to vote because they only set up so many polling stations. That's why they have these long lines and everybody doesn't get to vote, and then they have to extend the time for you to go vote. Whereas if you go to Lubbock, Texas, out in West Texas, everybody gets to vote. There's no long line there. And so what's happening is that the state of Texas and the legislatures there are making that by design, because they know, because the conservatives know that the people in Lubbock, Texas are going to vote conservative, and the people in Houston are going to vote liberal, or Dallas, or Austin. So that's the way they set it up. They don't put up very many polling stations because they know that that is a barrier to people to go vote. How they vote now is they want you to bring your some form of identification, which to me, I think is, we live in Portland. Everybody has, they have easy access to identification, but down south, it could be a real hard thing for you to get identification. So that's a barrier. That's the reason why. I mean, to us, it would be simple. Well, everybody has identification.
Right.
But down there, it's a whole different story. It's not easy for you. You got to prove yourself,
Wow.
And so those are the ways that, and then your name has to be on the list, and you have to have your name on this list to vote by a certain time. And if you're a person of color and you don't have your name on the list, then that election person is going to look at you a little bit differently. In every state, I think pretty much the Secretary of State is the official election officer of every state, and we have a good one. We have Sharia Fagan.
Okay. Yes.
And so in every other state, it's someone, it goes by party affiliation. So some parties want their people in, and other parties want their people in. So that's how it goes. I mean, and then the ebb and flow of conservatism and liberalism, and the fighting that we have, and it's really controversial many times. Instead of saying, hey, this person is over 18, the 26th Amendment gives anybody over 18 the right to vote. Women get the right to vote. Men get the right to vote. African Americans get the right to vote. Native Americans can vote now. Why don't we identify them way in advance?
Right.
And give everybody the right to vote. And let's put them on our list if they live in our neighborhood, because we want them to come vote. We want them to uphold their constitutional right. We don't want to prevent them from voting. We want them to vote. I mean, that's what I think both sides should say. They shouldn't be afraid that if one side votes and win, I mean, basically they should double up if that's the point, not to do trickery.
Right.
But that's what happens.
And it's interesting you mentioned, because Miss Vera, she touched on the fact that it's done in a different ways today. And so that is why I feel it's important for us to kind of spotlight, if you will, how it's done. So people can understand this is happening in front of your very eyes. People that are in charge of the voting. Ms. Vera spoke about different judges being placed. I think it was over 300 some appellate court and federal judges placed in place during the Trump presidency. That's huge. But today is the gentrification and different places to vote. That's placed in place. That's put into place. And so it's important for us to understand how important, this keeps going back to that voting right, how important it is to get out and vote, because we can make a difference if we understand the importance of voting and how important it is, irregardless of the obstacles, because we can look back in history and it tells us there will be obstacles placed in front of us. So I appreciate us tying it in and getting the perspective of progressive outlook on how Miss Vera seen it. And you gave us a historical perspective of how it was and a case. I'd like to touch on, we have a little bit of time, and I want to touch on the injury part, that you represent people in your firm about the injury part as well.
Thank you for asking. Yes, we represent people in injuries, and most of the time where, you know, when someone is injured, they don't know their rights.
Right.
Many times the best thing for them to do is to seek out a plaintiff's personal injury attorney to try to at least figure out what their rights are in a case. It could be an automobile accident case, it can be a case where they slipped and fell in a grocery store. It can be a product defect case, and it can be professional negligence cases. And all of these cases, people have rights, and they've been injured, and they're hurt, and they're in pain. And maybe the defendant's insurance company is pressuring them to settle their case. We'll pay your medical bills and give you $500. Just settle this case. You're under pressure. And they can relieve that pressure by just saying, and the insurance company for the person who hurt them can't talk to them anymore if they're represented by an attorney. It's just that simple. Now they have to talk to the attorney. And you want to get someone that really wants to, an attorney that really wants to fight for your rights. And there are a lot of good attorneys out here that want to do that. And that means that they don't get paid unless you get paid. So they're really motivated to fight for your rights. But, you know, you can imagine people of color and poor people, working class people, they're afraid of all that. They're for how much is it going to cost me to have an attorney? I can't fight all of these big companies. They're powerful. I'm afraid, and I don't want to be a part. I just want to get it over. Just give me whatever, and I'll just leave me alone. You know, and they don't know the extent of their injuries. It's just like in football, you know, Junior Seau, Walter Payton died of chronic traumatic encephalopathy because they didn't know that the carpet that they played on with concrete underneath and the helmet was defective to the place where so many punches on the brain trying to score a touchdown has left them brain dead at 40.
At 40. Wow. I appreciate how you give us a visual when you capture the cases so we can visualize. A lot of people can relate to Mr. Payton and his time as he served on the football field. And I want to do a little recap, but I certainly put it out for us to create an atmosphere in the shows where we continue to get to do this. But I certainly put it out for us to create an atmosphere in the shows where we continue to get to do this. One of the first things is you have the right to be silent and ask, may I speak to my attorney? And do that in a professional and calm way. However you might be and whatever you might be on at the time, present it, as Miss Vera said, in a professional and courteous way. And secondly, remain silent, regardless of the atmosphere. Don't start questioning them. Remain silent. Secondly, I heard us say, as you stay in that car or wherever you're at, remain calm. Remain calm. Answer the subpoenas. Get out and vote. And we heard from 2 attorneys. If you need some information, I'm sure we'll put that information up where you can give them a call. And you can get the information, because information is power if we use it. And again, I want to thank both of you. Before we close, I'd like each one of you to give us it's been so positive, so I don't want to say a positive note, but just a statement to all our viewers from your heart.
Well, thank you again for having us on here. I really appreciate it. And I would just say, in terms of Oregon specifically and Portland, we've talked about there's a lack of representation, but there absolutely are attorneys like my dad and I who want to connect. We want to network. We want to build a network of resources. And there are people like us doing the work. And so, even though it's far and few, it's a powerful few, and we're definitely trying.
We appreciate you. Mr. Ernest Warren.
Tony, I want to thank you too, because I've been amazed over the years, all the wonderful shows, all the people you've touched to try to help them understand their rights, understand what's important. What I want to say is I believe that everybody has a self-worth.
Right.
We don't need to marginalize people of color, poor people, working class people under the law. We need to uphold them. And so we need to do that through the law. And that's why we have a Bill of Rights in our Constitution, is so they can know their rights. So please do everything to educate yourself about your rights. And if you know your rights, you need to vote. See, many times we get a little bit apathetic.
Right.
We don't want to vote. This election doesn't mean anything. And we see it on the news at night. Only 40% of the people voted.
Right.
And then we're stuck with something that we really didn't want because we didn't vote.
Right. And that's so powerful. Ladies, have you heard it from Ernest Warren and Vera Warren? And I put it out there again that hopefully we can do some continuing shows to just keep the people educated and just keep this in forefront, because it's not, again, people, this is not just a Black thing. This is a human right to vote. People have died from all genders, race, ethnicity, whatever you want to put it up under, for the right to vote. So please understand what is happening right now in our society. Again, you heard it from Ernest Warren, you heard it from Vera Warren. This is Straight Talk TV, the show that cares about you, where the information comes from the people to the people. Be blessed, and tell somebody that you love them, and tell them, get out and vote. Thank you. Yeah, have a blessed day. Thank you again.